You are listening to rudolfsteineraudio.com. If you are listening to the podcast of this, it is located at rudolfsteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. As well, there are two publishing houses, steinerbooks.org in America and rudolfsteinerpress.com in England, who are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of a collected works, number, volume 93 by Rudolf Steiner, The Temple Legend, 20 lectures. Some of these are rather abbreviated stenographic reports, and others are out-and-out listener notes, but I'm going to put these on for completion's sake. This is translated by John Wood, and this is Lecture 8, which is entitled The Essence and Task of Freemasonry from the Point of View of Spiritual Science, Part 2, given in Berlin on the 9th of December, 1904. Last time I spoke about Freemasonry, and today I wish to add something to that. I should like you to consider that I am in a different position with regard to Freemasonry than to the other subjects we have spoken about, or which we still intend to discuss, as I usually only speak about things of which I have personal experience. In the present instance, I should stress to you that I am speaking to you as a non-Mason, and only from a theosophical point of view, whereas, to do full justice to the subject of what Freemasonry really is, it should be treated by one who is himself a Freemason. He would not do this, but this is for other reasons, which it is best not to discuss. At the same time, I would request that you treat what I have to say with reserve. When I said to you that only a Freemason himself could speak about what it really represents in its innermost core, so I would beg you to take into account that, in spite of that, there is probably no such Freemason in existence in the whole of Europe. This may strike you as odd, but it is so. Since the 18th century, Freemasonry has been in a very peculiar stage of its development. And I would ask you to regard everything I told you about it last time as being applicable to what it probably would have been like if it had remained as it was in the 16th or 17th centuries. As this is not the case, Freemasonry is, so to speak, only a kind of husk, devoid of its true content. It can be compared to a petrified plant, which is no longer the same as what constituted the plant, but is a crust or shell made up by something else. The ordinary craft masonry does not come into consideration where the things we are going to discuss are concerned, for this craft masonry, with its 3 degrees of apprentice, journeyman, and master, took its start from the Charter of Köln in 1535. Today it is not really anything more than a union for mutual stimulation with regard to higher education and schooling, a union for the purpose of mutual support and stimulation among its members. It is true that these first 3 degrees are, as it were, only the last remaining vestiges of the original 3 degrees of Freemasonry. And if the ceremonies were to take place as in former times, which they do not, then apprentice, journeyman, and master would be initiated in the way I described last time. The regulations are certainly that they should take place in this way, but only a few people know that these regulations exist, and still fewer know the meaning of these things. Everything I have told you about the effect of these ceremonies on the astral plane is something of which craft masonry has no clear understanding. Now, both the British and also the St. John lodges in Germany possess these 3 degrees which I have named, and they are actually all in the same state as I have just described. But the possibility is there, within these 3 degrees, through the very fact that the symbols exist, of penetrating through them to the deeper wisdom which underlies them. A proof of this is provided by the fact that a Mason whom you all know well by name has addressed his brother Masons in such a way that the germ of his theosophical awareness is thereby revealed, that he was able in a certain sense to speak in theosophical terms to an audience of Masons. The Freemason of whom I speak is Goethe. As theosophists, you will immediately find something very familiar when I read to you 2 verses of his Freemasonry poem, which he intended for his brethren of the lodge. Quote, "Yet call from beyond the voices of spirits, the voices of masters. Omit not to practice the powers of the good. Crowns here are woven in quiet, eternal, rewarding with plenty those who are active. We beg you, have hope." Close quote. Goethe speaks here of the masters, and he speaks of them within the precincts of the lodge, in spite of the fact that he knows that those sitting around him have no inkling of the profundity of his words, because he is also aware of the fact that through the atmosphere which surrounds a Freemasonry lodge, through the presence of symbols, vibrations are set in motion which influence the astral body, and thereby bring about a certain result. That is something which scarcely enters into the consciousness of Freemasons, but upon which those who know can still build today. Those who are led beyond the first 3 degrees to the higher degrees possess rather more consciousness. The first of these higher degrees is the Royal Arch degree, the degree of royal art. This degree is distinguished by the fact that its chapter or union has a special organization, which is filled with deeper meaning. In their gatherings, especially in those in which a new member is to be initiated into the secrets, never more than 12 fellow members are allowed to be present, so that, after the manner of occult brotherhoods, they really represent something other than themselves, something which lives among them in a mysterious fashion. They are not regarded just as persons, but as the personification of particular qualities. The first, who represents the most important in the circle of 12, is called Zerubbabel. He is a leader, the sun, S-U-N, from whom radiates the light which is to illuminate the others. He must needs be the cleverest and has to have a certain knowledge of the essence and meaning of the secret sciences. That is seldom the case with present fashions in the Royal Arch degree. I am talking about an ideal situation, in fact which only very rarely arises, when suitable people happen to be present. The next officer is Jeshua, the high priest. The third, Haggai, the prophet. Together with Zerubbabel, these 3 compose the Grand Council. The first and second principals come next, then the 2 scribes, Ezra and Nehemiah, and the janitor or tiler without the door. After that come the so-called lesser companions. Not more than 12 people may be present at any time. These 12 represent the 12 signs of the zodiac. The whole is a portrayal of the sun's passage through the 12 signs of the zodiac. That reminds us of what I told you about the Masons having taken their start in reproducing astronomical laws in particular buildings, in churches, cathedrals, etc. The arrangement of the lodge, though this is not always the case, is a large square hall with a vaulted ceiling, painted blue, and covered with golden stars to represent the heavens. The positions taken up by the participants is closely prescribed by ceremony. The novices, who are last to enter, take their places in the north, as they are not yet able to endure warmth. In the east stands Zerubbabel. In the west is the high priest Jeshua and the prophet Haggai. Readers aside, I'm pronouncing H-A-G-G-A-I as Haggai. I apologize if that's wrong. End of readers aside. And those who take their places in the south are roped together. Each of them has the rope wound around him 3 times, uniting him with his fellows at a distance of 3 or 4 decimeters. He who is initiated into this 4th degree, the first of the higher degrees, which in certain regions still provides an inkling of the significance of the temple legend, has to pass 3 veils. At each passing of a veil, one of the secrets is imparted to him. He is told the secret meaning of a particular verse from the Pentateuch. After this, the secret of the Tau sign is explained, and the Holy Word, the master word, is given him, which is the word by which Masons of the fourth degree recognize one another. And then, before all else, it is made clear to him in his first instruction how ancient Freemasonry is. The craft Masons do not usually get to know that, or if they do hear it, they have not the slightest understanding of these matters. The history of Freemasonry is related to them in the following way. The first true Mason was Adam, the first man, who had an extraordinary knowledge of geometry at the time of his expulsion from paradise. He was recognized as the first Mason, because, being the first man, he was a direct descendant of the light. The true, deeper origin of Freemasonry, however, predates humanity entirely. It resides in light itself, which existed before mankind. That is most profound, and reveals, for those who can understand it, what theosophical wisdom has again made public through its description of the formation of the earth through the first two root races and into the third, the time of Lemuria. Whoever can apprehend this through Freemasonry has received into himself something of tremendous importance. But that takes place in only the rarest cases, because Freemasonry is, as it were, degenerate today. This has come about because since the 16th century, man has had little understanding of the true meaning of Freemasonry, namely, that a temple has to be built in such a way that its proportions are a reflection of the great cosmic proportions, that a cathedral has to be built in such a way that its acoustics reproduce something of the harmony of the spheres, which is the source of all acoustics in the outer world. A knowledge of this original insight was gradually lost. Thus it came about that when Desagulaires, readers aside, apologize for the pronunciation, Desagulliers, Desagulaires, and the readers aside, reunited Freemasonry in England during the first half of the 18th century, no one had any proper understanding of the fact that the word Freemasonry had to be taken literally, that it really did concern the work of the practicing Mason, and that the Mason was one who built churches and temples and other great buildings according to cosmic laws, and incorporated into them heavenly and not earthly proportions. This original insight and its reflection in Freemasonry was lost. There was no longer any conscious appreciation of the transformation wrought by a proper use of acoustics in a building where the speaker's words are thrown back and are thereby changed in their effect. Those who built the great cathedrals of medieval times were the great Freemasons. They were aware of the importance of the fact that what was spoken by the priest should be reflected back from the individual walls, and the whole congregation immersed in a sea of sound, breathing and fluctuating in significant vibration, which would exercise still greater effect on the astral body than on the physical ear. That has all been lost, and it was inevitable that this should be so in the New Age. That is what I meant when I told you that what is left of Freemasonry is only the husk of what it was in former times. Apart from these 3 degrees, there are also the higher degrees, and those are possessed in a fairly complete form by the larger communities of Great Britain, America, Italy, Egypt, and also by Eastern Freemasonry, especially that known as Oriental or Memphis Masonry. In Germany, where there is a branch of the Memphis Mizraim Freemasonry with worldwide Masonic connections, the higher degrees are also functioning. But in Germany, within the St. John Freemasonry, there is so little understanding of the real significance of the higher degrees that the St. John Masons there generally look upon the higher degrees as nonsense. The Grand Orient of Germany is obliged, for this reason, merely to let the St. John Masons in general pass properly as Masons. In this respect, there are great differences, between the Masonry practiced in Germany and that of England or Great Britain. In British Masonry, a kind of reconciliation has been achieved through the Articles of Union of 1813 between craft Masonry, with its 3 degrees, and those branches of Masonry that recognize the higher degrees. Thus, as an apprentice in craft Masonry, one is allowed to enter and also graduate into the 4th, 5th, and 6th degrees, that is, into the higher degrees. The degrees pertaining to craft Masonry are credited to one in England. That is not the case in Germany. The German Grand Orient of the Memphis and Mizraim order undertakes the working of the 3 lowest degrees itself. The Orient Freemason must therefore have passed the first 3 degrees at the outset. He must furthermore commit himself to rising at least to the 18th degree. He may not rest until he has done so. A German Mason of the St. John's order is therefore never admitted to the higher degrees of Orient Masonry without having attained the 3 lesser degrees. The Orient Masonry consists of a graded instruction in occultism. As I said last time, it gives a picture of the teaching given in the higher degrees, those which succeed the Royal Arch degree. These provide a kind of astral training which leads up to the 18th or 20th degrees. Then comes that which provides a kind of mental training, a training which leads to a kind of life on the mental plane and advances to the 60th or 70th degree. Lastly comes the highest training of all, the most profound occult instruction, which can be undertaken in the Grand Orient up to the 96th degree. There are only very few in Germany who have advanced to the 96th degree, but in spite of everything, there is something in all this which will presently prove to you how little is left in present-day Masonry of what it formerly encompassed. The most interesting point is that those who have progressed to the 96th degree have not always been through a Masonic training, and that there is scarcely anyone at all who has completed the whole gamut of the training. There are indeed a few who have higher degrees. They have been invested with the 3rd or the 33rd or the 96th degree, but those who possess these distinctions have not gained them through Masonic training, but through other occult institutions, and they have allowed their knowledge to be used to bring about the redemption of Freemasonry. If someone has attained to the 96th degree, it has not been achieved through Masonic training. Bluntly, it is considered that in this respect Freemasonry is indebted to the occult training of other schools. In this sense, we have to interpret the manifesto which has been given by the Grand Orient of the Memphis and Mizraim Rite as a kind of ideal document. I will read it to you with 1 or 2 explanations. What is given here must not be construed as though it could be put into practice in the present day. It must be pointed out today that no Freemason, not even one who has the 96th degree, would take responsibility for taking another Freemason through these prescriptions, since he himself has not undergone them. Quote, "Concerning the secrets of the higher occult degrees of our order, a manifesto of the Grand Orient. One of the secrets belonging to the highest degree of our order consists in providing the appropriately conditioned brother with the practical means of erecting the true temple of Solomon within man, of restoring the lost word. That is, our order provides the initiated and selected brother with practical means, enabling him to gain proof of pure immortality during his present earthly life." Close quote. That is one of the points that are of utmost importance. The next point is one that exists in all centers of occult training. No calling up of spirits or spiritualistic activities. Anyone who practices spiritualism is strictly excluded. Quote, "This secret is one of the true Masonic secrets, and rests solely in the possession of the higher occult degrees of our order. It has been handed down by word of mouth in our order from the ancestors of all true Freemasons, the wise men of the East, and will only be transmitted by us in like manner." Close quote. Steiner again. That is the practice in occult societies. Quote, "Naturally, however, the success of this practical instruction for the attainment of this secret again depends entirely on the candidate himself. For of what use are the best and most tested and detailed instructions given to a candidate wishing to learn to swim if he is not himself prepared to move hands and feet when he comes into contact with the water? Or of what use is the most comprehensive guidance in learning to paint, or the exposition of the most vivid colors by way of example, if the candidate to whom painting is being taught will not take the paintbrush into his own hand and seek to mix the colors himself? He will never become an artist unless he does so. Those brothers, the discoverers of this secret, guarded it as a rare, self-acquired possession, and in order not to be misjudged or even derided by the man in the street, they concealed it by means of symbols, as we do to this day." Close quote. These symbols are no longer decipherable for the Freemason of the present day. Such symbols are not arbitrarily chosen. These are not things by means of which someone can portray something, like a professor who says, "I will illustrate this graphically." These symbols have been taken from the objects themselves, which have been engraved by nature. He who recognizes them for what they are, who can really read what they contain, comes into contact with their innermost being. He is led by them into their inner nature. These symbols portray the thing itself and do not have a merely symbolical meaning. Within Freemasonry, there is no one who is able to give guidance that would enable a person to arrive at the object itself. Quote, "These symbols are, however, no arbitrary chosen pictures, and they do not rest upon any chance occurrence, but are founded on the attributes of God and of man, and must be regarded as archetypal. But we will never take the form, the vessel, the ritual, the symbols for their content, but will seek the spiritual content within the form." Close quote. These words show, readers aside, there's a gap in the text, end of readers aside, for the symbol itself portrays the object. Quote, "And when we have found this, the spiritual content, and have absorbed it into ourselves, we shall recognize through this spiritual content the absolute necessity of the form, the ritual, the symbolism. Our higher degrees themselves provide the brother with certain proof of the immortality of man." Close quote. Steiner again. "This they would do if they were worked." Quote again. "That is and has been the great longing of mankind ever since human beings who could reason existed. Mankind needs to have this assurance of a life after death in order to be truly happy in this present life. Therefore all the mysteries contained in the religions and centers of hidden wisdom have occupied themselves with this question as their highest and principal task. The Church has naturally also occupied itself with this question of the lost word, the lost immortality. But it directs the candidate along the path of grace and portrays it as a gift from above and not as something to be achieved by personal effort. Our order, however, places it within the power of each individual seeker, by practical means, to unite himself consciously and voluntarily with the world consciousness, with the ultimate forces of creation." Close quote. That means, therefore, to provide insight into and union with that world, which otherwise is only accessible through the portal of death. From all this you may draw the conclusion that what belongs to the world's profundities was once found in Freemasonry, but is no longer there in the empty husk which it presents today. You must ask yourselves why. Now the meaning of the temple legend, the meaning of operative masonry, like all intuitive knowledge, had to be lost to humanity, because the fifth cultural epoch is actually the epoch of understanding. Intuition had for a time to lie dormant in the world, and Freemasonry is intuitive in its whole attitude and manner. I would like to draw your attention to Vitruvius and to the true symbolical building instructions that he gave. Only those, however, who have the right intuition for it can follow these instructions. Today, these symbolical instructions have been replaced by intellectual, rational ones. Reason had to become the keynote of man's development for a while, because everything that has meanwhile come to us through great conquests of nature must be incorporated in the whole organism of human activity. Understand what it means. The whole of the mineral kingdom will be included in the progress of the world during the present round of evolution. It will be included in such a way that man will gradually transform the whole of nature through his own spirituality. That is the meaning of the molten sea, that the whole of mineral nature will effectively be transformed. Man works in industry so as to weave organization, his own spirituality, in brackets, there's a question about, readers aside, about the continuity here, and a readers aside, into mineral nature. If you consider a machine, and readers aside, there's a gap in the text again, and a readers aside. In this way, man thus works the whole mineral kingdom back and forth with his own spirit. This recasting of nature, this recasting of what is mineral, will be perfected when our present round of evolution has come to an end. The whole of mineral nature will then have been changed. Man will have put his stamp on it, just as he imprints his stamp on a quantity of metal when, for example, he fashions a watch. Thus, when a new round of evolution begins, the mineral kingdom can be sucked in, absorbed. In order completely to finish the development in this sphere, the whole way of thinking that has gripped man since the 16th century must be carried right into the atom. Thus, only when reasoned thinking can grasp the atom can Freemasonry again revive. In the first stage, the outer form will be grasped. The next step will be when man has learned to think right into the mineral atom, when he has an understanding of how to make use of what lives in the atom and place it in the service of the whole. It is true that only now, and perhaps only during the last 5 years, human thinking has turned to tracing natural forces as far as the atom. And indeed, he who would understand this precisely must follow the latest phase of the various developments in electricity. The speech which the English Prime Minister Balfour has made on the subject of our contemporary world outlook is interesting in this connection, albeit only in its outward implications. What he said there about new electrical theory is something of enormous importance. He hints at the critical turning point in the development of man's thinking. He is, to a certain extent, conscious of this, and mentions it in one part of his speech. Thus we see how something is dawning in the consciousness of natural science, which plays into the future. This has been known to occultists since 1879. I emphasize this, although I cannot prove it. The occultist knows that this will come about, a new point of departure from the atom into the mineral physical world. That will be what will enter into the world in the 6th cultural epoch, and through this, Freemasonry will also be regenerated. In Freemasonry, the occultist has something very remarkable, something unprecedented, for it has something primeval in its foundation. It belongs to the most ancient of traditions, which has preserved almost 100 degrees in a precisely specialized structure, in spite of the fact that it has lost nearly all of its content, and that none of those belonging to it in Europe are able to form an adequate conception of it. But still, the thing is there, and one will only need to fill the whole outer husk with new content. The thing is there, waiting to be brought to life again. Now, there's a some points from the subsequent discussion. Steiner, Rites of Memphis, Oriental Rites, and Grand Orient Rites. A conference of occultists discussed whether the occult doctrine could be made public or not. From that it became clear that there are two tendencies, a left and a right tendency, one which is free-thinking and one which is conservative. The end of Lecture 8.